Hello everyone, welcome back. I am Old Man Clemens and today I am going to be giving you a shop tour. Let's start off over in the corner here with the scrap rack. So I keep pretty much all the scrap from my projects. You never know what you are going to need down the line. Just got a bunch of different sizes of round and square tubing and different thicknesses. Like I said, you never know what you're going to need down the line. I got all my sheet steel right here, and then I made this rack when I moved into the house to keep all of my longer material up off the floor, and it's just four of these little brackets that I TIG welded up and screwed into the studs of the wall. Up next is my horizontal bandsaw. This is a well saw. I ended up getting this just kind of on a whim. I actually was looking for a foot shear and I went on eBay just to see what the going price was, and I wound up finding one in town on eBay, and so I contacted the seller and said, hey, do you want to sell to a local guy cash off of eBay? And he gave me his number, and so I called him up and I swung out there to check it out. It turns out him and his brother, their whole business was buying and reselling machinery. Most of what they dealt with was a lot bigger machinery than this. This type of stuff wasn't really their bread and butter, but I'm sure they bought a whole lot of equipment from a business that was shutting down, and this came with it. So I went there to check this out and I gave it a test, and everything passed the inspection there. And so I had asked them, can I have a look around, see if there's anything else I might be interested in? They said sure. And so shoved in the back corner of the shop was this well saw. It was covered in dust. It was absolutely filthy. There was no blade on it, and the coolant reservoir here was completely filled with muck, and so they had gotten it in and had never touched it. So I asked them how much they wanted for that, and they kind of thought about it for a second, and I had found this on eBay for $1,400 for it. It came with the backstop here. This slips into the back, and this fence is adjustable so that you can make the same width cut over and over. So it came with that, and it also came with the material supports that bolt on to the front. So it came with all the accessories that you need for this, which is not always the case. They wanted $1,400 for it. I had offered them $850 for this, and they were thinking that over, and so then I just said, well, how about $1,000 for both of these? And they're like, yeah, that's fine. And so I basically wound up getting the well saw here for $150, which is just a smoking deal. So I brought it home, put a lot of elbow grease into cleaning it up. I cleaned up the pump that's down in the coolant reservoir. I went and ordered up a blade for it, and when I plugged it in, it worked, and it worked great. I had to fine tune the blade. You can see the adjustment here. There's some set screws on each side and a few more set screws back here, and so these blade holders right here rotate, and that's how you get the blade to cut true. So you basically take a piece of scrap steel and you just make cut after cut after cut until it is cutting perfectly, and the coolant pump worked and everything. And so this thing has treated me amazing. I'm still on the first blade that I bought for it. One of the things I did this year when I got back out in the shop and started working again was I put it on casters, because obviously with it this close to the wall, you're not going to be able to cut much more than a piece of material that's only a couple feet long. So if I want to cut one of like these pieces of square stock right here or something like that, we're going to have to pull it away from the wall, and in the past I just basically have to drag it across the floor almost. Could probably get a little bit heavier duty caster, but I also didn't want to raise the machine up too much off the floor. That's been a huge thing, so I can just push it out of the way against the wall here, and then when I need it, I can roll it out anywhere in the shop. That's my bandsaw, one of the most useful and often used machines that I have in the shop here. And then back over to the foot shear here. It's some people call it a foot shear or a stomp shear. Basically a shear that is operated with your feet. This one was made in 1974. It has a 16 gauge mild steel capacity, and when I went to go pick it up, the way I tested it is I just had a single sheet of paper and I slid it under and it cut it perfectly. And so that's a good way to tell that, one, the blades are nice and sharp, and two, that they are adjusted right. There's adjustment with the blade as far as the clearance between the two cutting surfaces. When I'm using this in the summer versus when I'm using this in the winter, I actually have to adjust this to make the best cut. It's a 32-inch wide foot shear, and it'll cut 16 gauge, the full 32, and then it'll cut thicker gauges in smaller width, and it'll cut 1/8 inch aluminum like butter. This is another one of the tools that was well worth the money and I use quite often. One of the things I did to accessorize the foot shear is to make this aluminum pan that all of the cuts fall into, so they're not just falling and bouncing all over the floor. It kind of cleans things up a little bit. Next up is my little grinding station here that I made. I mounted this old motor that I have here, and I usually just keep a wire wheel on it, but I can also put a buffing wheel, any other type of grinding attachments on it. And so that hangs off the edge here, so I can clean rusty bolts or just about anything else I need. And then I have this disc grinder, this 12-inch disc grinder set up here. That was just a decent motor I had laying around. It has a arbor on it that bolts to the 12-inch disc. And then I just wired it up to a switch that used to be on an old drill press I had. And so that's my little grinding station. I keep a bunch of little scrapers and wire wheels and my buffing pads and everything else down there. And this setup is light enough that I can just drag it out from the wall and use it if need be. Up next is a fairly recent addition to the shop. I actually lived without a drill press for a long time, and finally I knew I had to get one. This is an older Craftsman 15-inch one-horse drill press, really designed for woodworking, but most of the fabrication I'm doing is automotive related. Most of the material ranges in size from 22 gauge sheet metal up to 3/16 inch for some brackets and stuff like that. So this is plenty capable of doing that. It's just maybe a little more sensitive to the speeds that you choose, so you gotta fine-tune the speeds to the drilling operation you're doing and the thickness of the metal. I got this from a guy who had it in his basement. The thing is in absolutely amazing shape, and so I bolted it to the ground so that it's nice and sturdy, and it still had a little bit of wobble to it, so I made this bracket right here to bolt it back to the studs in the wall. This is just a piece of 3-inch stainless steel exhaust tubing that I cut in half and then welded some flanges onto, and now this thing is rock solid. One of the big additions that I have to it is this fab table from Fireball Tool. It's 18 inches by 24 inches. It has a grid of threaded holes and a grid of 5/8 holes that you can use to clamp anything down that you are working on. It's a pretty big table for the drill press, but it's already come in so handy. I made this little bracket on the wall here that holds all of the clamps that I use for this table and a few other accessories like the chuck key, the little key that removes the chuck if I ever need to. I have some air tool oil that I use for cutting fluid, and then one of the other things I have sitting back here is this Rotacut kit. These are broaches that are great for cutting sheet metal or anything really up to about a 1/4 inch thick. Drill bits don't produce a perfectly round hole. That's kind of a oblong triangle, and so if you want a really precise hole, you can consider these little hole saws. They are very precise. They make a very clean cut. You can chuck them up in the drill press or you can put them in a hand drill. And so this is not a cheap kit, but if you want to make really nice holes, especially in thin metal, this is the way to go. And so that is the Rotacut Fractional Master Kit. And right here we have just a Harbor Freight shop press, nice and cheap. I don't do a lot of mechanic work, but it always comes in handy. I built this little guy down here to hold a lot of the parts that I use when I'm pressing. I'll use something like this when I'm doing dimple dies on the press here, and then I have a whole bunch of different size solid rounds. Right here is a grinder that I got for super cheap at a garage sale from an old machinist who was retiring. This is designed to grind carbide bits for lathe tooling, but what I actually use it for is to sharpen my tungsten on my TIG welder, and it works amazing for that. I have this mounted to a 3-jaw lathe chuck that's pretty substantial. This whole machine is really solid, but also easy to roll around the shop when I need to. Next we have my Pexto and Wilcox slip roll. I got this off of Craigslist from a guy who was an HVAC worker. This is the perfect size for what I need in the shop here, and it's gonna come in super handy for working on the Aero sedan, putting all the floor pans back in, doing the drive shaft and transmission tunnel especially. I brought it home and cleaned it up. Haven't used it yet except for just for a few test panels. It was originally made in 1954. It's 22 gauge capacity, so it's only gonna work for pretty thin sheet metal. I'm doing 19 gauge in the Aero sedan, so it'll suffice to do it. I have a repair that I need to do on it. There's been a repair in the past here, and it's cracked right along this edge, and so I need to grind all this out and then braze that back together. So that's one of the things I'll be doing in the next week here before I need to use it. I made the stand for the slip roll and for my sheet metal brake out of a fab cart that I got from the same guy. He had a huge rolling fab cart that had some heavy duty casters. He just wanted $100 for it, and the casters alone were worth that cost. And so I snatched it up when I got the slip roll, and I brought it home and I cut it all apart, and I used that to make both of these stands here. And I bought some nice machine feet from McMaster-Carr. These swivel and they're height adjustable, so I can get this thing to not wobble. Next up here is my Roper Whitney bending brake. This is also rated for 22 gauge. This was made in 1990. I got this at an estate sale probably 3 months ago. I saw a picture of it in the ad for the estate sale, and I had no idea how much they wanted for it, but I thought it was worth stopping by. It was only about 5 miles away from my house. I had gotten there early, but a lot of people had gotten there even earlier. They had some classic cars for sale, as well as a bunch of other garage tools and some machinery and equipment. It really brought out all the people early, and since it was COVID times, they were only letting 8 or 10 people into the house and garage at a time, and I was probably about 30th on the list. By the time I was able to get in there, it was about 2.5 hours after they opened up, and so I'd already been there for probably 4 hours. The whole time I'm sitting there in the line in the driveway just hoping that someone didn't buy this and walk out with it. Luckily, when it was my turn to start looking around, it was still available. They wanted $200 for it, so that was a easy sale for me. I snatched it up right away. It looks like it's never been used. It came with the original instruction booklet, and it is perfect for what I need. It is not the biggest brake in the world, but for doing sheet metal work for floor pans and stuff, it's exactly what I need. So between these two machines and my bead roller that I'll show you in a bit, I have a lot of the sheet metal fabrication covered now. This little guy down here is my air compressor. It's the only air compressor I have. I've never had a real air compressor. I always had this little guy. This little guy is good enough for the two things I use it for, which is my Mittler Brothers tubing bender, which you can see me using in the my first 4x4 build video where I'm making the pre-runner style front bumper for my 4Runner. And the other thing that I use it for is an air gun, just to kind of clean up the shop and clean up some of the dust and everything when I'm working. So that's all I use it for. Now I'll show you my MIG welder. I've had this guy for many years now. I've probably built, I don't know, I've built at least a dozen, maybe 15 roll cages with it and countless other projects. It is a Millermatic 212. It is a 240 volt welder. I upgraded the ground clamp to this magnet style that has the on-off switch. And so that's super handy. It has the V-pad here, so you can attach it to round tubing and whatnot. So it's a lot more useful than having the clamp that usually comes on it. I always run 030 wire in this, as most of the fabrication I'm doing is going to be automotive related. So it's going to be anywhere from sheet metal to 3/16 of an inch thick. And so the 030 wire works well with that. Of course, I run mixed gas on it. So I have 75% argon, 25% carbon dioxide on here. I bought this nice Miller cover that they make specifically for this model of TIG welder, because I like to keep all of my equipment in top-notch shape, and I do a lot of grinding and other stuff in here, and so I like to keep it as clean as possible. Spent a lot of money on this, and so I like to take care of it. My only complaint about this machine is that it's analog. Literally 2 months after I bought this thing, the 212 and the 252 switched over to digital. So this, for the voltage, just has a 7-position selector, and then for your wire speed, it has 0 to 100. And right after this, they switched over to full digital, so you can adjust the voltage. It's not just somewhat arbitrary with only having the 7 positions. Now with this, they have a little cheat sheet behind here, and so it'll say if you're using the gas that I'm using and you're using the ER70S6 wire at 030 and you're doing 1/8 inch thick, there's your recommended setting. That comes in handy, although I found over time that there are a lot better settings than what they recommend, but at least it works as a baseline. And then they also have stuff for stainless steel, and if you have flux core and whatever else. So that's nice, but I found that for welding roll cages specifically, a lot of roll cage tubing that I'm using is 095 wall, that the perfect setting is somewhere between the 2 and 3 on the voltage selector. So you can run 2 with a little more wire speed, or you can run 3 with a little less wire speed. What I have to do is if I'm welding part of the roll cage and I'm welding it upside down, so you gotta counteract gravity, you're gonna have to go on the 2 setting and go up on the wire speed so that your weld bead isn't going to drip down. And then when you are welding a more level surface, something that's not upside down, you want it on 3, and then you want to lower the wire speed a little bit. So it's a little annoying in that regard, that it seems like the best setting for welding some material is like a 2.5. Other than that, this thing creates amazing welds, never given me a single issue. This is my Mittler Brothers bead roller. It is the Jamie Jordan Signature Series. It is the top dog of the line when I got it. It has the adjustable upper shaft, which means you can change the position of the top die, which comes in handy. This is driven by a motor that has forward and reverse and a variable speed. And I made a little die holder up top to hold all the various dies that I have. Most of them are the pretty standard Mittler Brothers dies. I have this die set here that creates a bead. These can create a few different shapes, but usually create a step similar to these. This is part of the art roll set, and so that's a nice sharp edge on it. You can use to do outline work. And then these are the Hammer Fab tipping dies that I just got. So those you can flange a panel. You can basically do the same thing that the Roper Whitney sheet metal brake will do, but you can do it on a radius if need be. I also have this adjustable depth stop for it that makes it a lot easier to create long straight lines with the bead roller. One thing I did change with it is I built this pivot off of the factory mounting location. You can see this used to bolt down to here, but I welded this tube in, made this bracket, and so I can fold the machine down so that it has a lot smaller footprint, and so I can wheel it over against the wall and it's not in the way quite as much. If you want to see this in use, check out the link right here to my video where I bead rolled some door panels for a G35. These are the test panels up here that I did for it. You can see one out of steel, one out of aluminum. And so this machine doesn't get used very much, but I also don't know what I would do without it. And this machine, in conjunction with the slip roll and the sheet metal brake, is going to have a lot of use in the next couple of weeks doing the floor pans for the Aero sedan. So I'll be replacing the trunk, doing floor pan up and over the C-notch, doing the transmission tunnel, and then finally the drive shaft tunnel. So make sure you like this video and subscribe so that you can see the updates on the Aero sedan project coming up. Next up here is my gas axe, or my Oxy acetylene torch setup. I found this at a garage sale about 3 years ago for 125 bucks, and it came with a full oxygen tank and a full acetylene tank. Just in the gas alone, it was absolutely worth the price, but it came with this real nice cart with these big tires on it, and the equipment on it's a little older, but it works great. It has an old Airco cutting torch on it, and just this week I had to replace the regulator on the acetylene tank. The regulator had gone bad, and I noticed that it was for propane anyways, not for acetylene, and so I got a new regulator and we're good to go. This thing doesn't get used a whole lot. I don't use it to cut much. If I'm going to chop anything, I'll actually just get out a Sawzall or an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. Can cut things much more precise. If I need to just hack something off real quick, I'll use it. Like if I want to cut off a bracket on a solid rear axle and then clean it up further with the angle grinders, I can do that. Lots of times I'll use this for annealing steel or aluminum, or when I'm doing my little metal art stuff, I can use it almost as a forge and heat the metal up so that I can bang it around and put it into the shape I want. Not a tool that gets used a lot in the shop, but also a tool that is very necessary, and I really don't have a lot of money invested into it. This is my main fab table in the shop here. This is a 1/2 inch thick sheet of mild steel that is 4x8. And I've made a bunch of modifications to it, which have come in real handy. One of the first things I did here was take this cabinet that I got for free and I put a jack underneath it, and then I just welded it right to the underside of the table. And so this has some of my spare welding gloves and helmet stuff. These are all my consumables and nozzles and whatnot for TIG welding. Keep some magnets and tape and gloves, spare glasses up here. And then to the side of it, I made what I'd call like a Jimmy DiResta style TIG weld rod holder, which is just a bunch of scrap tubing from roll cage builds in various sizes, welded together and then welded to the underside of the table. And that way I can keep all of my TIG welding consumables nice and organized right where I need them. I keep my Miller Dynasty 200 TIG welder under the table here. It's still mounted to the cart that it comes on, but I've modified the cart so that it fits under the table here. I've had this machine here for probably about 6 years now, and it is a great machine. The Dynasty series is the top of the line for the Miller TIG welders, and the 200 is the smaller of the 3 sizes of machines, but 200 amps is all I need for the automotive fabrication. Again, you're just not using very thick material. This thing has been great, although it started throwing codes one day, and so I took the whole thing apart and I brought it into the local welding store, and they plugged it in and it worked great, and they couldn't find anything wrong with it, so they took it apart and cleaned it anyways. I went and picked it up and it's been fine ever since, so that was kind of a goofy thing. I keep a lot of my magnets that I use for welding just right here on the side, and then I have this handy little guy that can hold brackets on tubing or anything else. I keep my argon bottle over here chained up to the side of the table. I always keep a grinding mask and some ear protection on that as well. And then I have a split set up here with a silicone line that I can use for back purging when I'm welding stainless steel. And then I always keep a small bottle of argon over here as well, so that inevitably when this one runs out and you're in the middle of doing a project, it's no sweat. You can switch over to the small one and still keep rocking. One of the other things I did for this table is built this holder here for all of my angle grinders. I like having a bunch of different angle grinders always set up. I have my good angle grinder here, which is a Bosch 13 amp unit and is speed adjustable. And on that right now, I just have a flap disc. I have an old Craftsman angle grinder that is higher amperage but not speed adjustable, and that just has like a 3M rust stripper disc on it right now. And then I have another older Craftsman angle grinder, and that has a cutoff wheel on it. And so I just like keeping all those right there so I don't have to switch out all of the discs and everything as often. And I actually have 3 other angle grinders that I keep in a cabinet that have various bits on them too. One of them is set up with a wire wheel. And then right here I have my adjustable speed Bosch DA sander. I just have that carabiner to the side here. I wind up using that quite a bit, so I just mounted it right there to the table. I keep my rolling cart underneath the fab table, and so this is just another surface that I can work on and roll around the shop when I need to, and that keeps all of my clamps here. So I just have various C-clamps that I've collected over the years, and a couple of strong hand clamps, and then a bunch of vice grip style clamps as well. And then I also have a few other styles of clamps. I have the new Fireball clamps, which you just use a 1x2 inch piece of rectangle stock, and you can create a clamp as long or as wide as you want. So if I want to clamp something between the frame rails, you're not going to be able to go to the welding store and buy a 4-foot clamp. You can buy these style of clamps, of course, but this one you can use just rectangle stock, and you can make it as long or as short as you want, and you can use it as a spreader or a puller as far as the clamping action. And then I have this right here that I built for doing intercooler pipes and stuff like that. That's a little smaller diameter. I think I can fit 3" in here, but nothing bigger. But it's welded to this clamp, and then I just use clamp over here on the other side. And what this does, if it's 2 pieces of straight tubing that I need to join together, I can clamp them together and then weld around it and make sure that they are parallel or concentric there. This comes in real handy on roll cages. Say you have your main hoop, and then you have your diagonal, which has to be 1 piece, and then you have your harness bar that intersects that diagonal. Well, if you want both of those bars to be perfectly aligned, there's various ways of doing it. You can use your eyeballs, you can use lasers, or you can just use this clamp, and that way you know that they are perfectly parallel to each other. And then I just have right here the smaller aluminum Fireball squares. If you guys somehow don't know Fireball tool, go check out the website, check out his YouTube channel. It's one of the best YouTube channels for fabrication. The stuff that he makes is absolutely insane, and I just wish he made more videos. The quality of his videos too is just ridiculous. Also mounted to my fab table here is this Beverly shear. I bought this from Trick Tools, where I buy a lot of my equipment. And if you're unfamiliar with the Beverly shear, it is a bench shear, obviously, but you can cut outside and inside curves in sheet metal really easily, and that's why it's got this interesting shape to it, so that you can actually curve the metal up through the jaws like that and create an inside radius. These are not cheap, but man, cuts through most anything like butter. And depending on the material thickness, you adjust the lower cutter back and forth. So if you have a thicker material, you want a bigger gap between the jaws. And so that's one thing that you fine tune with this. I got that bolted in place, but I always keep it up here. Then I have a couple other what I call DiResta, Jimmy DiResta style mounts here for some of my tools. This is just a hammer rack I made, again, out of some scrap roll cage tubing and a piece of angle iron. And so it just holds a bunch of the most commonly used hammers. I have a wood mallet, just a regular claw hammer, a couple of ball peens here, a couple of body hammers, and I have a dead blow and a little hand sledge, and then this guy, which is one of my favorite hammers, kind of just a little goofy guy, but works well. And then right here I did the same thing with some smaller tubing to hold my pry bars. I like just keeping things neat and organized like that. And lastly, on the table here, I have a Wilton bullet vise, and it is mounted to what used to be part of a drill press here. I don't want to toot my horn, but I think this is a pretty genius idea here. I took a drill press, was just a pile of junk and was all busted up, and I took the center section of it and welded it in as a leg on this table. I have an adapter here that I welded up that the vise mounts to, and so the vise can swivel, as well as move into any position you need. And then it's also height adjustable. And the other awesome thing about this setup here, well, there's two things. One, you can hide the whole thing under the table so it's not sticking out in the way by lowering the arm and then just pivoting it underneath the table. And then you can swap out the vise and you can put in a drill press table if you want. So that's another accessory you can swap out. And then you can also put the fab table that I currently have on the drill press, you can take this off and move this over to the welding table and mount it up, and then you have a nice welding table right in front of you so that you can do some more precision welding. The other thing too is, since you can move the fab table onto here, you can also move the vise onto the drill press. So every once in a while it might come in handy to actually have just the Wilton vise mounted up on the drill press depending on what you're drilling. And I can also always put the original drill press table back onto the drill press. So this thing has been super handy. It's convertible, incredibly useful, and of course this also rotates too so that you can have things angled, which I haven't had to use so far, but at some point very much could come in handy. And then I just have a couple of soft jaws that I use for the vise. These ones right here are great for doing like AN fittings. And then I have these magnetic Wilton soft jaw vise jaws that are good for clamping various sizes of tubing and anything else that you don't want to get marred up by the jaws here. So that's my fab / welding table. That's where the majority of the work in the shop gets done. I live in Minnesota and I do most of the work in the shop over the winter when I'm less busy with work. I have a lot more time on my hands. One of the things that is a necessity for a shop in Minnesota is obviously insulation, which this shop is fully finished and insulated, but it also has a massive heater in it. This is not your normal heater that's, up in the corner of the garage. This is actually a furnace from a house. It's 300,000 BTUs. It heats this garage up within about a half hour or 45 minutes, even on the coldest day. Can get this garage up to t-shirt weather in 10-degree weather. Usually I just set the thermostat for about 55 degrees in here. When I bought the place, all of the air just came out of the top and just blasted the ceiling, and so I put this ducting on and routed it to the edges a little bit. The ends there are adjustable. If I'm working in one area, I can aim the heat there if I really need it, or if I'm working on the welding table over here, I can actually aim the air away from where I'm welding so it doesn't disrupt any of the shielding gas. Also with the fab table, there's a whole series of holes all over the place, and those correspond to various machines that I will bolt onto it and use. One of those is a Milwaukee Portaband bandsaw, and then I got the Swag off-road table for it. So it's just a nice horizontal bandsaw that I can use. I use that for making brackets. You can actually cut some pretty thick material with it. You'll see in my Manhattan Project video of the 47 Aero sedan, me using it to create these upper bag mounts, and that's out of some 3/16 inch cold rolled steel there, and it just cuts through it like butter. Previously I would have had to make those with the cutoff wheel and my grinders. That is real handy because I'm running out of footprint, as you can see in the shop, for new machinery. I definitely don't have anywhere to put a decent sized vertical bandsaw like a Dual or anything. So I got that. I can bolt it to the table here. I can put it on the shelf when I'm not using it. I have a 10-inch bent shear that I can cut nice straight lines in sheet metal with, and that bolts up to the table here when I'm using it, and then I can go put it away when I'm not using it. And lastly, I have just got a Mittler Brothers bench press, and so I can bolt that to this table too, and that accepts their dimple dies. So if I'm doing thin material, I can just mount the dimple dies in that and dimple die something instead of using the shop press. What I really got it for though is because I needed a shrinker and stretcher for doing the floor pans in the Aero sedan. Their manual bench press, you can mount shrinking and stretching jaws into, and then it has about a 10 or 12 inch throat to it, whereas a lot of the shrinkers and stretchers that are on the cheaper side only have a 1 or 2 inch throat, or maybe a 4 inch throat. This has a nice longer throat, so you can do some stretching or shrinking in the middle of a panel if you need. That's what I really got it for, but I also got some of the accessories for it. One of them is a corner notcher, which I've already used a lot and comes in super handy. There's a lot of other stuff you can do with that. You can get louvers, you can get a shear for it, you can get a press brake, you can get punching dies, and so down the line I'll be getting a lot more tooling for that machine as well. But it was basically only a couple $100 more than a decent shrinker and stretcher would be, but it's way more versatile. If you've stuck around this long, thank you so much. I just wanted to show you guys the space that I'm working in and the tools that I'm using before we get started on all of the projects here. Stay tuned for a video coming out shortly, the project introduction to the 47 Fleetline Aero sedan that you've seen in the background of this video. That is a full comprehensive build. Doing air suspension, it's gonna lay on the rocker panels, doing a motor swap in it, doing whole new floors, tons of heavy fabrication, very extensive project. So that's gonna be a video series that goes on for quite some time. And then I also have another build series coming out after that that we will introduce that throws it back to some of the stuff that I used to be into. That'll be a fun kind of change of pace from the classic car stuff, and that'll be a car that I'll be able to use in different ways than just cruising. So thanks for watching. Old man out. It's way more versatile. Handy, so handy, super handy, handy.